iPhone, the iPad, and in your gallery. Now the next step is definitely some sort of ability to control the crop more directly, and we'll get there. But we think the starting place for that is more what we're offering when you post a photo or a block quote, which is the ability to choose between full screen and not full screen. That gives the ability of, like many of our most serious photographers are very intent upon having the entire image on the screen, exactly their composition. And they kind of steadily evolved from using primarily the full screen to using our framed layout, as we call it. And we'll provide that in the slideshow and the countdown very soon. In the meantime, there are certain kinds of images that really work well full screen. Point of view images can be really dramatic when you're just like staring in the eyes through the eyes of a parachute artist or something. We really want people to get used to how those get cropped differently on different devices. We can't get around it. It can't be full screen on everything without losing some content. So if it's a really dramatic central image like you get when you're portrait close-up or the kind of point of view stuff, then it's okay to lose the edges, a lot of landscapes. So there's no real solution to obviously getting the full photo on all these different screens, but we're going to keep trying to add intelligence behind the scenes to do the smartest thing we can with every image, and also give you more options.
Okay. I have a question. What did you do before Jux, and like, what's your background? Like, what brought you to Jux? What did you do before?
So my background is not typical for the team. The rest of the teams I mentioned is mostly developers. They're, all have CS degrees, all have been working with similar tools for 1 to 10 years, real range. Myself, my background is in design and in advertising. So I started with an anthropology degree. This is for the students, right? Started with an anthropology degree and engaged in what's called participatory or ethnographic design, where we'd study people on the ground and how they use tools. Did that for several years, designing software based on the actual experiences of people I would follow in the field doing things. Came to New York, and New York transforms everybody into an advertiser. That is, the sort of technology I was building was increasingly used by major brands to market their work. And there's a lot to be learned from the discipline of marketing, certainly. I was pleased to have the opportunity a couple of years ago to get back into more of a technology domain. Advertising inevitably becomes shorter duration engagements where you don't have the time to go deep into the technology. You've got to get out something tomorrow. It's more about the messaging. Whereas in a startup, you can really get deep into the innovation side of things, which is the most thrilling. So spending time with the technology and with the people, I spend as much time as possible kind of communicating with creators and looking to see where they're getting stuck. That combination of things is truer to my background in the ethnographic design, but still definitely informed by the marketing and advertising work I've done.
Do you think advertising will ever play a part in Jux, like other blog sites might incorporate advertising? Do you think Jux will ever do that?
I think that's a good question, which is basically, is advertising going to play a role in Jux? To an important extent, we try not to waste synapses on the money question until we get big. The important thing right now is really to find the creators and grow, grow, grow. I would love for businesses to get involved, but probably not with advertising on your Jux, as it were, right? We've all been kind of dismayed by the quality of advertisers who are on Facebook or Google, right? I mean, the stuff that's in the right sidebar of Facebook, you should never click on. Never. And by contrast, there are really excellent constructive collaborations between like magazines and brands. Historically, there have been some wonderful ways that they've worked together. So we want to be much more like that. When we move to the money question, we're going to try to focus directly on some businesses that we think are a good fit with the platform, give them the entire space, not just little banners, and see if we can develop a platform that they really benefit from, sharing content just like the rest of us, but with slightly different, tools to make it make sense for them. We think this is going to emerge on the iPad to an important extent, this advertising model that's less about click-through rates, as you find on Facebook and Google, where they're trying to, taunt you, as it were, to click, back to the content model where you're actually enjoying the advertising itself and it's part of the experience. I mean, a fashion magazine is better for its advertising, and we want to get to that place rather than where Google and Facebook are. That said, it's a very idealistic, and we'll see where we can go. By no means, however, are we going to suddenly start sticking banner ads on people's work. That just can't happen. We know it.
I've got a question. We've got some people here who want to design a yearbook, and they're just in the very first stages of it. What kind of advice would you give from your anthropology background or your design background for a group ready to start designing a book?
That's a great question. With all design projects, it's fun to start way before you think you should, right? Don't focus on these books, the previous yearbooks, or what other people are doing with yearbooks, or what's possible on a dimensional page. You've got to go all the way back to the human experience and start by having open-ended conversations, both with amongst the designers and with others about what your real hopes and desires are for anything, for a yearbook. What is this? Is this something that you're going to treasure when you're 40 as a memorial best part of your life? Is it going to be a source of dialogue between kids right now who really want to express themselves? You really got to understand what it means at a human level before you can begin to come up with a solution that really makes sense. 2D, paper, who cares, right? So you're probably doing that, but you can't do enough of it. And when you really have an idea of what that yearbook means, what its purpose is, then the rest will really come naturally.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How many members or users do you roughly have on Jux right now?
Good questions. So the numbers we track most closely are actually the number of posts created and the number of page views. From a user count perspective, we have about 65,000 registered Jux users. From a creation perspective, we've got about 35,000 posts created each month, last month. And that's the number we want to see grow a minimum of 20% every month. We really focus on that number, not because we're just trying to be hard on ourselves, but because we know that validates the concept and keeps the community vigorous if the kind of quality and quantity of creations just keeps growing. The other thing we track very closely is traffic from social media. I'll provide a little background here because it might be interesting. Blogs, like WordPress blogs, are primarily accessed via search. So what happens is you search for some information, there's a link to a blog post, you go and you read the blog post, and then you disappear. By contrast, and you don't care about who created the blog post, you don't explore the rest of their blog, it's not a human connection, it's just getting that information. By contrast, social networks are all about
Emily Podvin to the front office, please. Emily Podvin to the front office.
No problem. So social media is all about that social connection and finding out the context of who this person is and seeing more range of what they're talking about. We need to be more like social media and less like a traditional blog. So what we track very closely is the level of traffic from Facebook, from Twitter, from Tumblr, people cross-posting. We want to make sure that this is something that people are sharing friend to friend, rather than posting as information to be searched. And that's a kind of a very broad trajectory that the whole internet's making that we want to be very much on top of. The difference, of course, ultimately, is how much time people spend. So people go to WordPress on average for about 2.5 minutes a visit and see like 3 or 4 pages, versus Facebook is 20 minutes plus. I read that you can't see Facebook at all while during your school days for that very reason. But we definitely want to be more on that 20-minute side of things. So we see 20% of our traffic coming from links that people are posting on Twitter and Facebook, and we want to see that percentage continue to grow.
Time for one more question.
Who wants to take the last question?
All right. When you or a member has an idea, or you see something on another site, and you say, you know what, we can do this better. How do you make sure those ideas are like finalized and actually happen?
Great question. In a lot of contexts, like design agencies and advertising contexts in which I've worked, that process gets drawn out across several different specialized teams and a period of time. By contrast, in a lean startup, ideas can happen in the morning and be, implemented by the evening. What we're relying on is the fact that there's a conversation inside our doors that's not going on anyplace else. That we're so focused on the little set of things we're trying to achieve that there's kind of a unique collective intelligence around it. So we will do the bare minimum to realize something. We will not go through every possible necessary step. We will come up with an idea and think, well, what don't we understand about that? Do we not understand something about how to implement it? We have a design question about it. We have a policy question about it, like we want to use an API in one way, we're not sure if it's legal. And we'll just assign, the necessary person to this, the person who really wants to do it, generally, the person who has the itch. And we'll say, hey, go figure that out, and if we can do it, let's do it right now. Not everything happens in a day, but it's much more in that spirit of trying things out, figuring out the bare minimum of things to get over the obstacles and into the product.
Thank you so much. The track team's knocking on the door. We're ready to get into the slides.
I'm sorry we didn't have video on both sides, but I wish you the best of luck. I love your newspaper, and
Thank you.
Maybe we can do this sometime in the future.
Yes.
Please.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, yeah.
We appreciate it.
thank you.
And keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
We love your site.
Jux is amazing. We love it.
Thank you.